because this government has been continuously claiming that it's free from corruption. But this is mass corruption. This is massive corruption. This is organized corruption. And it's worse because it legalizes corruption.
The PMCARES fund was set up by the central government in March 2020 to tackle the coronavirus pandemic and to basically provide relief to all those people who've been affected by the pandemic. Now, since the time it has been set up, the fund has received over hundreds of crores of donation from government companies, private firms, individuals, celebrities, and many more. Now, there have been various questions related to the transparency of this fund. Many former civil servants have written letters to PM Modi asking about the transparency of the fund, the details about the fund. Now, to understand this better, we are in conversation with Aruna Roy, who is an ex-IAS officer. Thank you so much, ma'am, for taking out time and speaking to me.
Thank you, my dear. I am also an activist. I spent 7 years in the civil service, and the bulk of my life has been as an RTI activist.
Yes,
in the later part of my life, So anyway, so I represent two worlds, actually. I represent the civil service universe, but I equally represent the transparency universe and the RTI movement and the struggle that we all did for 11 years to get government to be accountable and transparent. So I speak from two fora today.
Which is wonderful.
The entire movement for transparency was to say that the state has the onus to be accountable to its people in a democracy. It has no grounds for secrecy because, after all, I send a person through my vote to Parliament to debate and discuss issues concerning myself, and they elect a Prime Minister who's accountable not only to the Cabinet and to Parliament, but to the people of this country. So when we lose sight of accountability, then democracy is affected fundamentally, and integrity and probity of public life is absolutely put on the shelf. So in such a huge collection of money, of course, there are many questions as to why there was a duplication of an already existing fund, but the transparency issue is non-negotiable. Because actually, any public money collected for a public purpose must be available for the people. But what has been even more shocking is that the Prime Minister has said that this is not even open for scrutiny by the Comptroller and Auditor General, the CAG, which is even within the norms of governance, a big error, because you cannot not allow the Comptroller and Auditor General to look at your accounts and your expenditure. So it's a compounded offense that you keep so much money in within, and I don't think there is any accountability that I know of to a cabinet or a group that has been appointed, or to even parliamentarians. So where does an ordinary citizen know where the money is going? We have no clue.
Absolutely, ma'am. Ma'am, when I looked at the letters written by former civil servants that I mentioned and several allegations made by the activists as well, it was very clearly written that the government is making it easy and, sort of denting rules so that the fund can get a lot of donations, but as you said, avoid public scrutiny. So do you see this as an organized loot or something, or as an attempt to just avoid public scrutiny by the government at a time when it should be the most transparent?
Actually, it falls within an entire paradigm of opaqueness that this government has been practicing. During COVID, there has been no parliament. Today, we have a Jan Sansad actually simultaneously going on in Delhi, which former members of parliament and current members of parliament are coming to depose. So parliament has not been convened. There is no parliamentary accountability. There is no accountability to the CAG, and there is no accountability to the people. Then what are we, to whom are we giving this money and for what purpose? Because there has got to be a system of public probity. Within government, there is a system of public probity where you have the CAG who's committed and who has the responsibility of going and overseeing funds. In the transparency regime that we installed into the governance system in 2005 with the RTI law, there is a requirement that all public spending must be under public scrutiny. You cannot have public spending under private scrutiny. Of course, it raises very, very critical issues of siphoning of funds. We don't know where the funds are being siphoned. We have no clue. And even if they are, which I doubt, but even if they are doing it with probity and integrity, the allegations will stick. because without
Yes.
transparency, nobody can prove even their probity. So
Absolutely.
it cuts both ways. It cuts into their character of integrity and probity, and it of course betrays the basic social contract to enter into with a citizen when that citizen votes for parliament and for governance.
Ma'am, first the government claimed that PM Cares is a private body and therefore it can, skip public scrutiny and all the RDI requests. And then the government said that no, it is a government body and received crores of donations, as I mentioned, from companies, individuals, and much more. Now, do you think the government is making itself, as you mentioned, more opaque to avoid this scrutiny? And if so, what is the way ahead? How do we go about this? Because, as you mentioned, it is
Firstly,
important to know where our money is going at the end of the day.
firstly and critically, this government plays around with a lot of procedural issues.
Yes.
Even if you look back at the electoral bonds, they played around with procedural issues, and they do a hairline walk between what is permissible and what is impermissible. According to the PM Care Fund, they have said that it will be constituted as a private entity and not a public entity. First of all, how can a prime minister create a private entity in his role as a prime minister? Whatever he creates, no matter what he calls it, is a public entity.
Yes.
Because he is really asking for money from people, and that makes it a public body. So if it's not subjected to the Right to Information Act and not subject to the CAG, the entire transactional operations of the PM Care Fund comes under very deep suspicion. And I think we demand that, actually, as an activist, I would demand that they go transparent completely and show how much money has come in and how much money has been spent where and for what. Secondly, I would say, why are you spending the money without consultation of the states, without federalism? First of all, nothing happens in New Delhi. Everything happens in the states and happens in their subdivisions and divisions and their districts and their villages. It doesn't happen in New Delhi. For that reason, everything that's collected as money by a prime minister for forced expenditure is a federal issue. And that because all the COVID cases occurred all over the country. So what was your relationship with the states? Number one, what happened to federalism? And secondly, I would say, make this money totally public so that scrutiny can be done by people from all walks of life. Need not necessarily be, if you're scared of activists and if you're scared even of ex-civil servants, open it up to the people. Let journalists scrutinize it. Let people who know accounts scrutinize it. Let private bodies scrutinize it. But this is completely unacceptable that you don't open it up for public scrutiny. And I'm afraid one of the reasons why such things happen in this country is that we do not make enough of a noise. I don't know whether we don't understand the gravity of the situation. And because this government has been continuously claiming that it's free from corruption. But this is mass corruption. This is massive corruption. This is organized corruption. And it's worse because it legalizes corruption. And it's legalized corruption and legalized non-accountability to a people in a democracy. You're betraying essential democratic principles and values and processes.
Absolutely, ma'am. As you correctly mentioned, when we look at the basic questions that remain unanswered related to PM Cares, they're very simple questions. How much money has the PM Cares fund got till now? Where is the money being used? And these basic questions have constantly been declined by the government. This entire PM Cares Fund controversy has raised some serious questions. Now, do you feel this is a deliberate attempt to block access of information to people?
It's absolutely. I mean, in the very nature of the composition of the fund, in the manner of behavior of the fund, it is absolutely an attempt to block any kind of transparency. But as an ex-civil servant, I'd like to say that when I was trained in Mussoorie in 1968-69, we were told that you must not only be honest, but you must appear to be honest. So it's not only, for instance, it goes for me beyond appearance, that you not only must be honest, but be willing to share that the process of honesty with people. Otherwise, you're always under suspicion. So if this government really cared for its character of probity, if its government really cares for its profile of integrity, it would share the information. increasingly, whether it is electoral bonds or whether it's PMCARE, they have been regularizing and legalizing corruption. They have been inverting the law. So the due process of law, the legal processes which should support constitutional norms have been subverted. So you have a subversion of the laws, subversion of procedures, and subversion of regulations, so that we do not access information. And if we ask for information today, we will be told that you are going against the process, the due process of law. So it is an inversion and it's a subversion actually of the process of law.
Absolutely. Ma'am, when the fund was set up, the first question that came to everybody's mind was why, and as you mentioned in the beginning of the interview, why was there a need to set up PM CARES when we already have PMNRF? What do you have to say about that?
I think it is unnecessary, but there's been lots of duplication. Another parliament is being built when we already have a parliament. I think this is just to show that there is a bigger chest size or a bigger profile or a bigger nation now than before. But it isn't so at all, because for many years, because that Prime Minister's Relief Fund was set up in 1948 and it lasted till last year, and it did its work. There were some problems with the Prime Minister's Relief Fund as well, because when it was set up, there was no transparency norms. So there are no norms for transparency and sharing, but it was not necessarily an opaque law by intent. But it became like that because all processes in governance were the way they were.
Yes.
Instead of making Prime Minister's Relief Fund a transparent fund now, and making it receive the monies that it should have, then they would have shown up the previous governments if they wanted to show it up. Absolutely. But in PM CARES, they're just, the fiefdom is shifted. You're just saying my fiefdom is here and I'll do what I like and I'm a better fief than the previous ones. But it doesn't make any sense to the people of this country.
Absolutely. Ma'am, adding on to what you just said, while we are asking tough questions of the current BJP government, it is also important to note that this problem has had a precedence. So it's not just the present government, but the previous government also that failed to furnish details of the PMNRF fund. Now, do you think it's time the government realizes, even the present government realizes, that people are aware, they know, and they will ask tough questions, and that it is important for them to give out the necessary details?
I think if I were in government, I would be very proud of the people who ask questions, because it shows the democracy is coming of age, that citizens are taking an interest in the life of the country and the communities. I would be proud to say that mine is a mature democracy or a maturing democracy, instead of which they clamp down on us. And that's why I said, if the Prime Minister's Relief Fund was not transparent, that I would have, if I were in a seat of power today, made the Prime Minister's Relief Fund more transparent, and thereby saying that I am one up on the previous government, rather than bringing in an alternative set of rules and regulations under the PM CARE Fund and making it as, if not more opaque than the Prime Minister's Relief Fund. We are supposed to progress. We are not supposed to regress. I mean, there is no point justifying today that you are opaque because the Prime Minister's Relief Fund is opaque. Prime Minister's Relief Fund was created in 1948 in a governance system which still had a lot of colonial overhang. Today, we are in a state where the colonial overhang is being challenged everywhere. People are understanding that it's a social contract with my government, and my government, through my vote, is committed and bound and mandated to reply to my many questions. When that kind of questioning takes place, and a person says that because in so and so year there was a relief fund which was secretive, I'm going to be secretive, it doesn't hold at all. And whatever popular media might do of it, but in essence, it is an attempt to hide. And where there is an attempt to hide, there is suspicion. And where there is suspicion, there will always be a bad reputation. And if this basic logic is not going to appear clearly to our leaders, then there's something wrong with the political paradigm in which they're working.
Absolutely. Ma'am, as we discussed, people are aware about this issue, but there's not much outrage. What do you think the government should do right now to, settle this entire PM CARES controversy? Because these are some tough questions that we're asking of the government.
the government doesn't want to do anything. That's apparent and clear. I would now say the people have to ask. That's why this bunch of IAS officers have raised this issue, because they're also now people, because they're ex-civil servants.
Yes.
They're part of the citizenry of this country, and trained citizenry who have been trained in the process of governance. So coming from them, it has a value which is much more than somebody, say, on the street asking a question.
Yes.
They know how government functions. So that's why the responsibility of that letter is for the responsibility of citizenship, the responsibility of an informed citizenry. And what does an informed citizenry do? I think it is important, and we must quickly understand in this country that civil society, comprised of many different kinds and sectors of people, will have to raise a collective voice for anything to be done, because governance is becoming more and more arbitrary, more and more opaque, and more, in many cases, unjust.
Yes, I think you've made some very crucial points, and I'd again like to thank you for taking our time and speaking to me.
Not at all. Thank you very much for doing this interview at a time when it's critical that people of India understand exactly what they lose when they don't have transparency.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.